Okay, I'm back. Leif Spork here, Spork Tile Art. This is part two of mold, Hydrostone air release mold making. Part two of the process on how to make one of these molds. First step I showed here. Part one shows how to make these. Talks about this special tubing called mold duct tubing. You can get it if you Google it on eBay. It's not. There's two types. There's a cloth type of tubing, and then there's this polyester kind of a synthetic tubing. This is much cheaper than the cloth, but it's a little bit more tricky to use. So when you're starting, I would recommend using the cloth first to get the hang of it then. The reason why this is harder to use is because the plaster will leak into this type of synthetic fibrous tubing, whereas the cloth tubing, I've never had the plaster leak through it. But there's just little holes in here. So there's a trick that I use to make these work that I'll show. But like I said, these are much cheaper. But it can get frustrating when you're starting to use this because it's you really need to figure it out first using the cloth tubing. And I seriously advise using the cloth tubing first. So the next step is to get the die ring ready for the plaster to be poured. So my press is right there. It's a press that's no longer made. I have two of them actually. So I've never seen one for sale. It's a perfect little size tabletop press, but the company stopped making them for some reason. You can hand press the clay into these. The quality of the tiles you pull out of it is not as good as using the press. There's something happens with that high pressure being exerted equally as these dies go up and down in the press that allows really fine reproductions of every tile you make. When you're smashing the clay in there with your hands into those molds, it's not uniform, and for something happens. It's the weirdest thing. Learning to make these is a really weird thing. It's I can't explain it, but it takes a while to get the hang of it. Trying to figure out what's going on, and there's still things that I can't quite figure out. How the air is distributed in through this. It's just there's always a little bit of a chance that it might not. For some reason, you might have to redo the molds, but I'm pretty good at these now, and almost every time I do one, it turns out pretty good. But be prepared to get a little bit frustrated when you're learning how to make these. But if you keep trying, it's going to work out. So you'll see here they have to have little stoppers on these rings, so that when there's two of these rings that come together. Excuse me. So two of these rings come together on the press. So they have to have those little stoppers there so that they don't collide. So first step, I'll put the camera up here and start working with my hands. Okay. So I'm gonna make these. I'm gonna put all three of these in here. So I'll be able to press three at once. And these are gonna be Christmas ornaments. So first step is to get this ready. I'm going to get a little clay. Okay, so this is gonna these rings are at a very slight angle. That ensures that the plaster doesn't come out. It's not a big deal. In a future shows, I'll show how you can make these out of wood, and when you do them out of wood, you don't worry about it. You just go straight up and down. But there is a slight angle on these rings, and it's just something to know. Really, it doesn't really matter, but because we have to block. From here to here, you'll see we have to block this because I'm going to set this down on the table like this, and we don't want the plaster spilling out. So we're going to put clay and dam this up all the way around the edge here. This camera So what I do is I just kind of balance. I roll little worms or little snakes, and I just balance it on the edge. So there we go. I just kind of, very simply just kind of balance those on the edge. And then you just got to kind of quickly got to flip it. And then press down and smash the ring to the table. Okay. So the next step is, now I want to make sure we fill in all the gaps. So you see some of the clay kind of smooshed out. So we just want to take our finger and kind of be careful, because this die ring still isn't really secured to the table. You want to smear that clay and get it into all these little grooves, or where the ring makes contact with the table. Okay. And try to just make it nice and smooth and even all the way around, just so that you're sure that there's going to be no leakage. Okay, done. Okay, next up is each one of these die rings will have a little spigot, little nozzle where the air pressure hooks into them. And I see that this ring is missing one, because a lot of times we just take one from another ring. So let me round one up really quick. Just be a second. Oh, there we go. So these little guys right here, you need these. These are what hook? Well, this will hook to the tube of an air compressor. And as you see, I'm just taking one from one of my other molds. I have about 700, or not 700 of these. I probably like 300 of these. So I get these at the Napa store, or at a auto supply store. You can get these here in the United States. Any auto store has them. Home Depot has them. You can order a bunch. Usually they don't have very many in stock, but maybe 2 or 3. So it's good to sometimes order some. You can find them on eBay too. You just screw that in. Nothing too. Okay. Next step, and this is an important step. So we take our mesh and right there, take our mesh and the mold duct tubing. Oh boy. I hope we have some of this stuff. I'm not seeing it. So we're going to use a straw. This is one way of making these. This is the best stuff right here. You get this little tube at a hardware store. I don't know what size it is, but it fits easily inside of that little spigot that you get. But you can also use, and actually what the old manual says to use is a straw. And you kind of have to cut the straw a little bit so that it fits in the hole. You just kind of twist it in, get it in there a little ways. And what this is really doing is it's just creating a more stable kind of connection between the spigot where the air is going to be coming in and where it joins this mold duct tubing. So this is like the Bush fix. version. Like I said, the best is to use that rubber, that plastic tubing that you get at the hardware store, because you can stick it down in quite a ways, and then you really are guaranteed that it's not going to pop out. Because when you put that pressure on there, sometimes it'll want to pop out. So next, before we put this in, you can see here, we're going to want to place these in here. So the design's going to be facing up. These are design lists because I'm going to press plants into these. So I just kind of add no specific order really, just you don't want them to touch, and try to space them out so that there is a little bit of space in between each one if you're going to do multiple ones. I've made these before where I've done 9 1x1s all at once. So you can experiment with how many in different shapes and sizes when you do this type of mold making. So you can see that they're in. The manual might talk about creating an edge around these so that so the clay is somewhere to see. When you put these in the press, and when you put this die ring, when this is finished, when you put this in the press, the clay, I think there's like 2,000 pounds of pressure being exerted on both of these molds, and then the clay is in the middle. So the clay gets smushed out, and it gets smushed into the design, and then once the design's full, then it gets smushed out of the outside of the mold. So if you get the manual, will teach you how to make these cavities and these reservoirs out of clay around your tiles or around whatever objects you're making molds of, and I really haven't found that to be necessary, and it's a big pain in the butt trying to figure out how to do it. And when you start to think that you have to do it that way, then it limits, like this here. It would just take a long time to try to do that. I found that it doesn't really matter. The clay gets smushed out. Maybe if you have a weak mold, maybe it might bust the mold, but the mold might be going to bust anyway. So I think when it balances all out, you're probably better off not wasting your time making these little berms around these that the manual will talk about making. So I just don't even do that at all anymore. I don't even do that when I make the 5x5 tiles. So I just let the clay get smushed out. Everything seems to be fine. If 1 out of 10 breaks because I didn't do it that way, I'm going to save a lot of time and get more stuff produced that's going to be more valuable to my business if I speed it up by not doing what that manual says. This is one of those cases where you just don't follow the rules. Who knows who wrote those rules? Could have been written 30 years ago before who knows what. Anyways, so yeah, put the screen in. This is kind of tricky. So again, we have this straw on here. You kind of just got to trim the straw or the tube. And you just got to keep trimming it. There's a little hole that it's going to want to fit into. So you just kind of, it's going to take a little bit of twisting and turning. You kind of got to bend this metal. And it's not, that's hardly ever is that perfect. There, did it. So you get really good at cutting these squares out of the construction mesh. And I got lucky here, and we nailed it the first time. Okay, so this is basically ready for the mold to be poured. There's one little thing that I like to do sometimes, where the tube meets the spigot here, the hole that goes through there's a hole that's drilled through the die ring. You can fill that a little bit with clay before you pour the mold. And what that does is, just in case. This is why straws aren't very good, because just in case plaster could get inside of there, it can clog it up. This kind of prevents that. If you're using this tubing, like I said, you can weave that right down into the hole, and it doesn't matter if plaster gets in there or not. You have a continual tube going in and out, so it's not going to. be clogged by plaster. So that's the one other thing you can do. So let's take a close look here. So this is ready for the Hydrostone to be poured. So this is going to be part 2 is finished. We're going to go to part 3, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to do part 3 in a few minutes and make another.